In advance of their presentation, I'll compliment on it. And if they have some things that are bad in there, I'll revise them.
All right. Jim?
That was my lead into that was it. The ISO report's really positive. It was a good teamwork as it went forward. We've got a great fire department. Those were my lead-in comments for Chief Bryant to come up and talk about a very time-consuming, complex issue regarding our ISO classification. So with that, Chief Bryant.
Good morning. Good to be here. And Mayor and Council, it's a privilege for me this morning to present this report on our recent ISO classification process. I remember it may have been about this time last year that there was an article in the Oklahoman about the ISO ratings of Oklahoma cities, and it wasn't a very glowing article as far as the ratings of a lot of the cities across the state. And again, that generated some discussion, and Councilman Ryan in particular had some questions about our ISO rating. And lo and behold, late last year, the ISO was doing some other cities in the state and notified us that they would be conducting an official audit of the city, which hasn't been done in some time. So with that, talk a little bit about the process, and just to kind of give you some background. The ISO, or the Insurance Services Office, is the leading supplier of actuarial and statistical, underwriting, and claims data services to the property and casualty insurance industry. So the insurance industry, as far as calculating property insurance rates, again, sometimes and to different and varying degrees, uses ISO classifications in order to determine those rates. What the ISO does when they conduct an audit is they develop a public protection classification, or PPC, and again, that's based on a community-wide evaluation. So they don't just look at any specific thing so much as it's kind of broad-based across the community, so they don't pick and choose areas. But it does give insurers and the insurance industry the most up-to-date and reliable information about a community's fire protection services. I go, are we working together? The criteria that they use is developed from an objective review of features of available fire protection. Again, that would have a lot of influence on minimizing damage once a fire has occurred. So again, as far as part of the fire department's mission, just under protection of life is the protection of property, and so that goes along with that very well. They use a 100-point scoring system where the spread, or the classification rating of that public protection classification, is 10 points. Class 1 being the best you can achieve, and to Class 10 being what you don't want to get. That classification, again, is based on a thorough grading of a community's fire mitigation efforts and the location of property relative to fire stations and available water sources. This is, again, was a total city, and we'll talk about that here in a little bit. But again, there's 3 city departments that are basically have a lot of influence on this classification, and that come under the ISO's review. And you can see there on the screen the departments that are involved. So our communications system, our public safety communications, is 10% of the overall rating. The fire department obviously being the bigger portion of that at 50%. And the available water supply for firefighting is 40% of the overall classification. And again, this applies to both residential and commercial property. Don't want to try and get too detailed about this, but in some cases, some cities are given just a single classification, and it's probably really based on size. And then some are given a split classification, which that's what we have. And again, that probably has a lot to do with our large geographic area. But again, that single classification number would cover all properties within the jurisdiction. And then the split classification, look at properties that are within 5 road miles of a fire station, but over 1,000 feet from any type of established water supply or water source, and those areas are generally given a Class 9. There is another part of the rating, Class 10. Again, that's the least desirable, but any property that's over 5 road miles from a fire station is given a Class 10 regardless of their proximity to a water supply. And then again, all others fall in within the 1 to 8 category. We were last graded by the ISO in 1993 and received a split classification of 3.9. And basically a lot of that, they did take our information at that time and as far as the number of fire stations, the number of apparatus and so forth. But a lot of that classification at that time was based on fire loss statistics here in the city. And so therefore, at that time, a comprehensive audit, as was just recently done, was not completed. With the 3.9 split that we had at that time, there were still obviously areas of the city that were rated at 10 because of the distance to the nearest fire station, as we just spoke about. So that brings us up to first of this year. So January 31st, again, we were notified earlier that ISO would be conducting a comprehensive and complete audit. And so we put together a team and met with the ISO on January 31st. And so you can see that the people within the city, the staff that made up that team, and just while I'm on that, you can see that for the fire department, our fire marshal, Deputy Chief Kelly Sawyers, who's here with me today, was the project manager, and I can tell you that she not only had a good team working with her, as I'm sure she would tell you also, but did a wonderful job as far as how comprehensive this was an undertaking. So she's to be commended for her work in this. She was the lead from the, and again, as we moved through it, not only led the team through everything that they needed to do as far as assignments, but also was in always close contact with ISO. So that process of actually receiving the rating didn't drag on too long. Of how comprehensive this was, and you can see the departments there and the personnel involved, you know, in communications, in Oklahoma City IT, and in the water department, obviously. So a lot of the preliminary work was completed through emails and a lot of data that was collected and given to the ISO as requested by them for to begin their process and prior to their first return visit. Again, one of the biggest parts of this that they actually had to do that you couldn't do by email or couldn't do by just data that you sent them was that they wanted a complete tour of our 911 communications center to see the equipment, the systems as far as phone, radio. They actually had to complete a system failure test to basically test the redundancy of the system, to make sure that there was sufficient backups, to make sure that, again, notification as far as emergencies could be done without any type of interruption. So I'm sure, as you've seen in your tours of that facility, that the ISO saw a very modern interoperable communication system and state-of-the-art emergency communications center. On the fire side, again, not only just the stations, the number of stations that we have in the city, but a complete inventory of our fire department fleet, the number and the condition of our apparatus, the specific equipment that each of those apparatus carries had to be inventoried, and that information had to be forwarded to the ISO. Not only our frontline equipment, but any reserve apparatus that we have in our fleet we had to give them all that information as well. Verification and documentation of our annual testing, as far as testing of pumps, aerial ladders, those types of things, to make sure that we were keeping up with that. And again, the final report generated and included all that information. The ISO audit submission is what so the documentation that we ordinarily keep. Again, this isn't something we just did for this process, but this is just something that's ongoing in our department as far as maintaining proper documentation of inventories and testing and so forth was very helpful in the information that we forwarded to ISO. They look at our training records on the department, And again, requires very specific and detailed information about our training facilities, the amount of training that goes on at the company or at the station level, the amount of training we do for our supervisors and officers on the department, our apparatus operator or driver training that we conduct, hazardous materials, and so forth, and any pre-fire planning, obviously, that we do, which, again, we have a pre-fire planning program that's been going on now for many, many years. So all those records, again, were compiled, they were available, and we submitted those as far as this process was concerned. Here's, I think, where one of the main areas where it helped us in the improvement that we achieved. We did time tests to certify each partner jurisdiction's apparatus. So, again, because of the size of our city and the relationship that we have with the metro area departments, we actually had to bring them in, and in the areas that aren't covered by the city's water system, to demonstrate how much water that we could produce in again, where we're areas that don't have hydrants available for firefighting water. Again, those test results were entered into ISO's computer model. Again, and that requirement is 250 gallons per minute for a duration of 2 hours. So, again, we did some tests, and we'll show you who all cooperated with us that here in a second, but 250 gallons a minute times 2 hours is 30 gallons. 30,000 gallons that we had to show that we were capable of supplying in areas where we don't have hydrants. So you can imagine what an undertaking that was. These are the departments that cooperated with us in that testing, and we want to thank them very much. Obviously, we have good relationships, reciprocal relationships through our mutual aid agreements with these departments, and they helped us out very much, and certainly we would be more than happy to return the favor if they go through this same process at some point. This map will show you where those tests were conducted, so you can see they're mainly in the outlying areas, and again, we tested in all these areas for ISO's benefit to show that in all these areas, through our mutual aid agreements, that we could provide that necessary fire flow of 250 gallons a minute for 2 hours. And the information that we got back from the ISO on that we lead the state in hauled or transported water operations. There's like a top 5, and we're right up there in that top 5, and also found out that we're among the top 14 or the top 30% in the country in being able to deliver water in that manner. I can tell you that, again, this is maybe the biggest factor in lowering that classification to what we were able to do. And the man that was primarily responsible for that, or this was his part of the project, is with us today. I'm going to call him former Major Kevin Stone King. He was a member of our department until here just recently when he retired, and now he's working for the insurance office of the State Department of Oklahoma Insurance Department. And Kevin, if you'd like to comment on that in any way, come up, feel free.
Thank you. Appreciate the chance to talk to you guys, and what an honor it's been being an Oklahoma City firefighter for 27 and a half years. And I got the call in January to head the haul water portion of the ISO review. And I didn't see the prize at the end at first, but I do now. And personal note for me, this put me on the radar with the Oklahoma Insurance Department. So now I'm the ISO coordinator for the Oklahoma Insurance Department. My job is to go around and encourage departments around the state to lower their ISO rating. There's over 1,600 departments statewide, and 52% of them are rated a 9 or a 10. And I don't believe that's a correct reflection of the fire service in Oklahoma, as it was not a correct reflection of the fire service here in Oklahoma City. We're better than that. And that's my job now, is to encourage the departments to go through all the hoops that it takes, and there is a lot. There's a lot of pieces to the puzzle to put together for a department, and not just the fire, but the water and the communications. So it was my honor, and I'm certainly glad to have done it, and I'm happy to be where I'm at today. Thanks, Chief.
Just to remind you, in the outlying areas, we have 6 heavy tankers. Originally, they were 2,500 gallons, and this is how we achieve. You can see the operation there in the picture of those heavy tankers come in, set up portable tanks, drop water, and through a shuttle system, and again, using some of our partners from around the metro area, can maintain that fire flow. Of our 6 tankers, we start out with 2,500 gallon. We're replacing some of those now with 3,000 gallon tankers. And again, get 3 of those converted over to 3,000 gallons in November through our vehicle replacement program. So kind of the timeline, again, January 31st is when we kicked this off with our pre-survey meeting. We started the tanker shuttle testing with the partner departments in February, and that went through March. Completed our apparatus inventories in March. April 3rd, we did our pre-submission meeting and communication center tour and water facilities tour and interview at that point when the ISO came in and visited. And then by April 15th, we had all documentation and information submitted to ISO for their review. And July 20th, so just here recently, we did receive our notification of our new classification. And you see there, again, as we once were a 3.9, now we're a 3, still in the areas that were originally 3. And that FPSA you see there is Fire Protection Service areas. Again, that's to be considered the areas that are covered by the water system. And the 510 on the OPA, or what is referred to as the outside the protected area. So going back to that split classification of a 3.9, we went to a 3.5. So we would have been, I can tell you this, we would have been tickled to death. And I don't know that any of us even anticipated that we could get to even a 3.7, but we would have been absolutely thrilled to do that. So when we found out that the work that we put into this actually got us to a 3.5, again, it was a little bit even unbelievable on our part. And that, again, is the most significant improvement. What ISO does also is when you submit your information, is they do give you some recommendations on what could improve it even further. And so we'll absolutely look at some of these points that you see up there as far as suggestions on not necessarily mutual aid, but automatic mutual aid. Again, we do a good job of documenting all of our training internally on our department, but we probably need to do a better job of documenting our training with other departments. Again, we, on those heavy tankers that we were seeing earlier, we do automatically respond to in areas that are not covered by hydrants. And again, they recommended that we maintain that, recommended that we add in an additional tanker. And that last bullet point you see there is that new fire stations are built, that classification will decrease even more. So as you're aware of, through the 2007 general obligation bond issue, we proposed and the citizens approved the addition of 3 additional stations. And it just so happens that those 3 stations will be in areas where it will make a difference as far as decreasing that classification in those areas. And one of those will start this year, Southwest 119th and Rockwell. So this map gives you an indication of the areas in the city that are within 5 road miles of a fire station. So you can see there's a little swath on the southwest corner there. There's a little pocket down there kind of in the southeast area and so forth that, again, will be addressed with the addition of those fire stations over the next few years. On the next map, we overlay the areas that are covered by hydrants. So now you can see the remaining green areas there. Those are the areas that were previously a 9 that, because of our ability to provide water at that rate in those areas, will drop to a 5. And again, as you all know, there's several homes and businesses and so forth in those areas that could see some benefit from that. So what The economic impact, and again, I want to be very careful here and maybe say potential economic impact. I mean, and it's yet to be seen at this point, and we'll discuss that here in a moment. But from some of the surveys that we've done of some of the insurance carriers here locally, reducing from a 9 to 5 in those areas, some people could see as much as a 50% drop in their insurance rates because of that classification. And again, it's in your city manager's report, but you have to understand, and we want our citizens to understand, obviously, that some carriers do use ISO very heavily in calculation of rates. Some use it to lesser degrees, and there's some that do not use ISO at all and more of a loss history type of criteria. But what I would say, and again, I appreciate Councilman Ryan's comments prior to me coming up, but and it is a reflection of the fire department that we have and the commitment of our people as far as providing fire service in the city. But I would also say this is a potential very good dividend for the investment that our citizens have made in public safety over the years, as far as, again, the equipment that we have, the staffing that we have, and again, their support of bond issues to continue to build up public safety. So apart from the great emergency response and other services that we provide, again, this is an additional benefit that they could realize for their investment, and I don't think enough can be said about that. Before I conclude and take any questions, I would like to, again, thank the whole team within the city. Again, it was a total city effort, a lot of work, a lot of good work, and again, I think the effort that we put into it paid off in a big way. We truly could have done this in a cursory way just to get through it, and we wouldn't have realized the improvement that we got had we done it in that fashion. And I'd also like to introduce a couple other guests that we have with us today. Senator Randy Brogdon, who's now working for the Oklahoma Insurance Department, and Philip Bradley, who's with the ISO. And Philip could probably address any questions specific to the ISO or even comment on what the process may have been like working with Oklahoma City. But appreciate them being here with us today. And with that, I'm glad to take any questions.
Gary?
Well, as you can imagine, I can't let this go without comment. And regardless of what the former water director said, it was only 40% water supply, Mr. Cowan. That doesn't mean that you should be fire chief at some point in time. We fought over that for many years. I do too want to recognize Kevin for his work. Even when I was still the chief, I can remember Kevin having many ideas about the design and the use of water supply apparatus, and he's been very interested in this, has worked the outlying areas for a number of years, and I appreciate the work he's done on it. I think people that are not in the business don't understand how big a deal it is to get this kind of a rating, and I think it shows what Chief Bryant and his department have been able to do and are willing to do in this area. If there are some people out there saying, yeah, but we've got a 10 in some areas or whatever it may be, you got to understand Oklahoma City, as spread out as it is, it's going to be very hard in our lifetime, certainly, to drop any of that down. You're going to have distributed water supply throughout the entire city, and you're going to have a whole lot more fire stations for that to be impacted. But for what we're able to do right now, I think it's an excellent rating, and it shows the character of the department and their work so far. I'm a little disappointed, and it's been this way for a long time, and I dealt with this when I was the fire chief. The insurance department in the state allows insurance companies to not use ISO, as the chief explained, and use their loss data. And that could be a roll-in of all loss data. They can use loss data from ice storms and tornadoes and wind and whatever it may be to show their loss data for their company in this area, and then get a rate based on that loss data. And I think that to encourage companies to use this kind of a rating that shows what the departments can actually do is more representative of what your rates ought to be.